Hey everyone, how's your day going? Whether it's been good or rough, you're not alone. So sit back, relax, and let's step into the world of mystery together. You ever have one of those moments where you realize if you had just been a few minutes late or taken a different route, your life would have been completely different? That's exactly what happened to my girlfriend and her friends one Sunday morning. It was just another quiet morning in a small town in Texas. The kind where the streets are empty except for a few early risers grabbing coffee or walking their dogs. I was already at church waiting for my girlfriend to meet me. She had spent the night at her friend's house and they were on their way to see me for the first time. Instead of taking their usual route, they decided to try a different way. A shortcut. A decision that would change everything. As they drove through an empty side street, they noticed something strange up ahead. 3 men, big, rough-looking guys, were dragging a homeless man out of a narrow alleyway. At first, they weren't sure what was happening. Maybe the men were trying to help him? Maybe he was in trouble? But as they got closer, they saw the truth. The homeless man was barely able to stand. His clothes were tattered, his face covered in blood, and his breathing was ragged. His arms dangled at his sides like he had no strength left. And the men? They weren't helping him. They were forcing him toward the back of a pickup truck. My girlfriend, who was in the passenger seat, rolled down her window and shouted, "HY. What are you doing?" The 3 men froze. Then, all at once, they turned to look at her. One of them, a guy with a knife tattoo on his neck, stepped forward. His face was calm, too calm, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. This guy stole from someone. His voice was low, almost bored. Just handling it. My girlfriend's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She scanned the street. Nothing. No dropped purse. No signs of struggle. No crying woman saying she had been robbed. Just the quiet, the homeless man's bloody face and those men staring her down. And then, before she could react, a 4th man appeared. He wasn't empty-handed. He was carrying a machete. The moment froze in time. Without hesitation, without warning, he lifted the blade and swung it down. It sank deep into the homeless man's stomach. The sound wasn't a scream, it was a wet, gurgling noise. A horrible, choked gasp as blood poured down his chest. The driver panicked. She slammed her foot on the gas and the car shot forward, tires screeching as they tore down the street. Inside the car? Screaming, crying, shaking hands, fumbling for their phones. They called 911, voices frantic, trying to explain what they had just seen. "We saw a man get stabbed. We don't know the exact street, please send someone." But there was a problem. They had been moving so fast, panicked so badly, they weren't sure exactly where they had been. So they made a crazy decision. They turned around. Because if they didn't give the right location, no one would come. But when they got back, the truck was gone. The men were gone. The homeless man? He was still there. Somehow still alive, gasping, barely holding on to life. They were about to get out and help him when they saw something that made their blood run cold. A motorcycle pulled up. A different man got off, dressed in all black, his helmet reflecting the morning light. He walked over to their car like he had all the time in the world. And then he tapped on the window. Tap, tap, tap. My girlfriend didn't move. Slowly, the man leaned in, staring at her through the glass. And in the calmest voice imaginable, he said, "You should go. This isn't your problem." The way he said it, like it was a fact. Like he knew they wouldn't do anything. Like he had done this before. That was all it took. They sped away. Too afraid to stay. Too afraid to do anything else. Later, after church, some people went to check on the homeless man. And when they got there, he was still sitting against a crumbling brick wall, alive, surrounded by a few kind strangers who had stopped to help. But when they asked him what happened, he didn't say a word. Just shook his head. Over and over again. Like a man who knew if he spoke, if he said the wrong thing, he wouldn't survive the night. A week later, the news reported that a homeless man's body had been found under a highway overpass. No arrests. No suspects. No evidence. It was as if it had never happened. But it did happen. And ever since that day, I haven't been able to stop wondering. What if my girlfriend hadn't driven by? What if she hadn't yelled at them? Would that man have made it one more day? Would he have had a chance? I keep thinking about his eyes. Not just the pain in them, but something worse. Hopelessness. And I think about the world we live in. How easy it is to look away. To tell yourself someone else will do something. But what happens when no one does? How many people walked by that alley that morning? How many people saw that man bleeding and thought, not my problem? And how many times has this happened before and no one ever knew? That's what keeps me up at night. Because in the darkest corners of our world, where no cameras watch, where no one is paying attention, monsters walk among us. And the worst part? Sometimes they don't even bother hiding. I've always been a night owl. Back when I was in college, I had this routine, waking up at 3 a.m. to study. It was quiet, peaceful, the perfect time to focus without any distractions. It became a habit, something I did almost every night. But there was one night, one small decision that changed everything. That night, I was exhausted. I had spent the whole day at school, and by the time I got home, I was too tired to even eat. I just wanted to sleep. As I was setting my alarm, I noticed my phone battery was dangerously low. The charger was in the living room, but I didn't want to leave my phone out there overnight. I needed it next to me to wake up. So, instead of setting my alarm for 3 a.m., I set it for 2 a.m. just in case the battery died. That was the small decision, and it might have saved my life. The next thing I remember, my alarm was ringing. I groggily reached for my phone, but something felt off. You know that feeling when something isn't right? When your brain picks up on danger before you even fully understand why. I sat up. That's when I saw it. My bedroom door was wide open. I froze. I was 100% sure I had closed it before going to sleep. I always closed it. My mind immediately started racing for explanations. Maybe my mom had checked on me? Maybe she forgot to shut it? But then I noticed something else. A shadow. In the corner of my room. A shape. A person. And that's when my blood ran cold. Someone was in my room. For a moment, I thought maybe I was seeing things. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me in the darkness. Then, he moved. I wasn't alone. There was a man crouched in the corner of my room, watching me. My breath caught in my throat. My hands gripped my blanket so tightly my knuckles turned white. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. He had been there the whole time. Then, just as I reached for my phone, he stood up. It happened in an instant. 1 second, he was just a shadow lurking in the dark. The next, he was moving toward the door. And so was I. We lunged at the same time. For a split second, we were face to face. And I saw him. A man I had never seen before. His skin was pale, his eyes dark, expression unreadable. And then he smiled. Not a normal smile. A sick, twisted smirk like he was enjoying this. Then he lifted a single finger to his lips. Shoo! And then he bolted. Right past me. Through the hallway. Straight into the kitchen. Out the front door. The moment he was gone, I finally found my voice. I screamed. I ran out of my room so fast I nearly tripped over myself. I pounded on my mom's door, yelling, choking on my words. There was a man in my room. There was a man in my room. She yanked open the door, her face pale. She grabbed her phone and immediately called 911. We didn't go outside. We didn't chase him. Instead, we locked the doors and screamed for help, praying someone would hear us. Thankfully, one of our neighbors had just gotten home from work. He heard the commotion and ran over. Soon, more neighbors joined in, checking around the house. But when they searched, he was gone. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. The front door was still locked. Just when we thought it couldn't get any stranger. We found my school bag. It had been dumped out onto the kitchen table. My notebooks. My papers. Everything scattered across the floor. But here's the thing, I had left my bag in my room before I went to sleep. Which meant he had gone through my stuff. He had been in my room before I even woke up. How long had he been there? What was he planning to do? The police came. They checked every door, every window. They asked us over and over if we were sure we had locked everything. And we were. There was no forced entry. No broken locks. No fingerprints. Nothing. It was like he had just appeared inside my room. And then disappeared. To this day, no one knows how he got in. No one knows who he was. And the worst part? He was never caught. For weeks after that, I barely slept. I kept my bedroom door locked. I double-checked the windows. I jumped at every noise in the dark. Because I couldn't stop thinking, what if I hadn't set my alarm for 2 a.m.? What if I had slept until 3 a.m. like I usually did? Would I have woken up to find him standing over my bed? Or worse, not woken up at all? People like to think that their home is safe. That as long as you lock your doors at night, as long as you shut your windows, nothing can get in. But I learned something that night. Sometimes they don't need to break in. Because sometimes they're already inside, waiting, watching, and hoping you won't wake up in time. Growing up, I spent every summer at my grandparents' house in a small town in Pennsylvania. It was the kind of town where nothing ever really happened. Long, empty streets, quiet neighbors, and the kind of place where kids had to make their own adventures. But there was one place none of us needed to imagine stories about, because the whole town already had one. At the very end of my grandparents' road stood an old, abandoned house. It was huge, 3 stories tall, towering over every other house in the neighborhood. The windows were boarded up, the paint on the walls had peeled away long ago, and the front gate hung open like an invitation. But the weirdest part? The entire first floor was covered in cartoon stickers. The kind you'd see in a daycare, smiling bears, happy clowns, Disney characters. But they had been there for decades, and now they looked wrong. The colors had faded, the faces were scratched and peeling, and some of them looked like they were crying. No one lived there. No one even talked about it. Except the kids. And one summer, my cousins and I decided we were finally going in. There were 6 of us that night. Our 2 oldest cousins, both 15, came up with the plan. They would go in first, explore the house, and then call us over the walkie-talkie when it was safe. Then the rest of us would follow. That was the deal. Simple, right? That's what we thought. We waited behind some bushes while our older cousins slipped into the house. It was past midnight and everything was dead silent. The streetlights barely reached the house, and the deeper they went inside, the more their flashlight beams disappeared into the dark. Then 10 minutes later, the walkie-talkie crackled. "It's fine. No danger. Come fast." That was all we needed. We ran toward the house, trying not to look at the stickers that seemed to shift in the darkness. The front door was slightly open, a gap just big enough for us to slip through. Then, "Come upstairs. We're up here." The voice came from the second floor. We stopped. Something felt wrong. The voice sounded like our cousins. But there was something off. It was too flat, too emotionless. I felt my stomach twist. Then one of my younger cousins whispered, "That doesn't sound like them." I agreed. It was too perfect, like it had been copied from a memory. Then we heard it again. "Come upstairs. We're up here." Identical. Word for word. Same tone. Like a recording. That's when the fear hit me full force. "Go. Now." I hissed, and we turned and ran for our lives. We didn't stop until we were back at my grandparents' house. And when we got inside, our hearts still pounding. We froze. Because sitting on the couch eating ice cream were our 2 older cousins. They looked up at us confused. "What's wrong with you guys?" I couldn't breathe. "But we just heard you," I whispered. "At the house. You told us to come upstairs." They stared at us. "We never went," one of them said. Their mom had caught them sneaking out and made them go to the store instead. They hadn't even taken the walkie-talkies. Silence fell over the room. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Then who was inside the house?" No one had an answer, and none of us wanted one. The next morning, my grandparents overheard us talking and pulled us aside. And that's when they told us the story. Years ago, a woman ran a daycare in that house. That's why the walls were covered in stickers. They were meant to make the place feel welcoming for the kids. But then one day, she and her family moved away. Or at least, they tried to. On the drive to their new home, they got into a horrible accident. None of them made it. And no one ever lived in the house again. It just sat there, untouched, slowly falling apart. For the next few days, weird things kept happening to us. One of my cousin's bike brakes suddenly failed, sending him crashing into the sidewalk. Another cousin tripped down the stairs even though she swore she felt something push her. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was standing at the foot of my bed. That was enough for my grandmother. She took us to a priest who gave us protective charms and prayed over us. After that, nothing happened again. But none of us ever talked about that night again. The mansion isn't there anymore. A few years later, the town finally tore it down. They built a new house in its place, a normal home with a bright blue front door and flower boxes in the windows. But every time I visit my grandparents, I drive past that spot. And every single time I ask myself the same question. What would have happened if we had gone upstairs? Who or what was waiting for us? And if we had listened to that voice? Would we have ever come back?